Okay. All right. We are good to go. Hello, everybody. My name is Oxana. Thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to be part of this conference. There's been a lot of amazing talks. And hopefully I can leave a little nugget of something interesting as well. So today I will be talking about including all investors at Vanguard. Vanguard is an investment firm. So at the heart of my presentation, we'll be talking about financial inclusion of people with disabilities. And I'll talk about how I've incorporated that into my role as a researcher at Vanguard and things that I've learned. So a little about me. I am a researcher with a background in service design. That is my humble beginning as a design kind of practitioner. I have a master's in design research where I started and then later finished designing a physical board game for people with Down syndrome that teaches them how to invest and manage money. I'm very passionate about working with a community of people with disabilities of various kinds. I've been doing this as part of my work since 2015, and about 5 years ago, it became an official part of my title. So it kind of transitioned from something that I was known for in passion projects to incorporating that into my role. And the way I did that is that I built a panel of clients and prospects, of investors, and people interested in investing at Vanguard. And the panel consisted of investors with disabilities. I should also say I am a white, able-bodied woman. I have brown hair. I'm wearing glasses. This topic is very interesting to me because while I am able-bodied, I am also first-gen. So I can relate to the feeling of maybe not being included or feeling different. And so for me, it was temporary. And I feel very passionately about people with disabilities and the experiences they have and the barriers they face. And I'll talk about later on in the presentation why it's important to address those things in the financial space. So just to kind of go over a little bit of the structure of my talk today, we'll talk about Vanguard's commitment to including investors with disabilities. I'll talk about my role as a researcher and including accessibility and inclusion into my role, what I've done. I'll share what I've learned so far, some highlights, and we'll take a look at what 2024 and beyond looks like as far as scaling my efforts across the organization. Okay, I had a couple of, it's a fast transition. Okay, so why is it important to include investors with disabilities? And to unpack that, I kind of want you to think for a second of what do you picture when I say investor with a disability? Give you a couple of minutes. There's no right or wrong, answers. Anything that comes to mind is good. And the reason I ask that is because it is a big topic of conversation when I kind of address this. And I've done some looking into what imagery we have out there to cater to investors with disabilities. So in the design community, if I were to build a page and I wanted to have inclusive imagery, what would come up? I've done a couple of experiments, about 5 years ago, what imagery came up. We've come a long way since then. But let me show you what comes up now in AI-generated images and Google searches. So right now we have this. So on the screen we have two images that are very similar to each other. One is AI-generated. It is more of an illustration. And then the Google imagery is the one with real people. But you'll notice that it seems to be one type of disability that we're seeing. We're seeing the wheelchair. And it could be because that is the most prominent thing we're thinking about when we think of accessible parking or accessible bathrooms. We usually have an icon of, the person in the wheelchair. It just might be something that is our go-to representation. But when I asked you to think about an investor with disability, did you think somebody in a wheelchair, so physical disabilities? Did you perhaps think of somebody who may be blind or visually impaired? Did you think of somebody with a cognitive disability, maybe Down syndrome, autism? And also, what context did you think of them in? Was it somebody who is receiving help from an able-bodied person looking at the stock market? somebody who is savvy and is making day trades. So all of these things are kind of important of how we think about it. And, I think it really depends on what we are exposed to when we think of in the media and images and when we think of people with disabilities. It's also, if you know one person with disability, you know one person with disability. So it is a very wide range of people and financial interests and literacy, much like anybody else. So let's just kind of think about quick statistics of disabilities. I'm sure everybody knows these, but I just want to go through them. 1 in 4 adults, that's 61 million Americans in the US, 73% of consumers have a disability. It says that it's roughly 10% of that number is something that is an invisible disability. So maybe something that is a cognitive impairment or something that you wouldn't really know looking at the person that they have a disability. I do have an asterisk by this number because this number, it's kind of fuzzy because it could be self-reported. Some people don't want to say that, yes, I do have a disability, especially in the workforce. So, it's safe to say that the number is going to be slightly higher. But this is a sector of people that have a collective of $13 trillion in disposable income. Is it surprising? Maybe it was, but it is. And so this is a sizable market, and this also means that this is a demographic that needs financial management, that needs financial inclusion, and it goes beyond banking. It goes beyond having a bank account, a savings account. Investing is part of that. It's being able to grow your wealth. It's being able to do more with it. Also, as we age, we acquire disabilities. So one thing is, roughly when we reach the age of 65 to 74 and above, we start to develop more disabilities. We acquire things, low vision. We start to forget things, maybe cognitive decline. Also, mobility. So anything with walking is usually the most common thing that we develop. And also, I do want to stress that, again, things with forgetfulness and things like that, if you were to ask somebody of that age, do you think you have a disability? They're most likely are going to say, no, I don't. Maybe I forgot a couple of words here or there, but they're not going to say, oh, I have a disability. So with that in mind, let's make some real life examples of an investor with a disability. Maybe Sarah, who has started multiple businesses, then sold them. Now she trades frequently in large amounts of money, and she was born blind. What about Maggie and Dan? They're married, and they're about to have a very sizable inheritance, and as they're thinking about, well, what are we going to do with it, they want to invest. And so they're going to be looking for a company that is accessible, committed to inclusion of people with disabilities. Why? Because Maggie is blind and Dan has low vision, so it's important for them to have access to that information and being able to work with their money. Maybe Annie, who has an investment account in her name and is learning more about finances because her parents are teaching her. And Annie has Down syndrome. So let's think about that aspect of investing as well. And of course, we have Pat. He's in his 80s. He's been investing since he was 20, but now that he is getting up into the 80s range of age, he's starting to have maybe some vision decline. Maybe he's beginning to forget some things. So we need to design with these needs in mind. And all of these examples are people that I have talked to in my panel. These are real life investors that I've interacted with. And I think it's really important to say that two things can be true at the same time. You could be a person with a disability, and you're a very savvy investor like Sarah here, making great, big trades. And it is important to her that a company respects her and sees her. Because our money is important to us. And so we don't want to be seen as just a number, as just a dollar sign. We want to be seen as a person. So looking at Vanguard's commitment to inclusion, financial inclusion is freedom. It's dignity. It's very important to think about these things of what does it allow us to do? We need to be able to do these things ourselves. We all take pride in it. And maybe we take things for granted that we can log in and quickly scan a page and table of numbers, and we're able to see what the cost of this stock is, or maybe take a look at our balances and what our monthly spending has been, and we can easily go from bank to bank and not think about, can I actually look at my numbers? Can I do this by myself independently, or will I have to ask for help? So including all investors with disabilities at Vanguard. Now, I work in what is called a client experience in digital, CXD, and we focus on the holistic client experience. We're looking at different channels of interaction, so the whole picture of not just digital channel, go to the website, go to the app, but we look at attitudes, we look at risk tolerance, we have all kinds of ways to categorize different personas and behaviors when it comes to investing, what products are right for them, and looking into that thing. And so when I think about inclusion, and when I was incorporating investors with disabilities into my role, I took the same approach. So looking at the holistic experience of a person with disabilities, not just can they accomplish a task when they come to our site, but how do they learn about money? What is important to them? What does setting a financial goal means? All of this conversation that we're having with our teams, I always make sure to sprinkle in, well, how would somebody with a disability think about it? Is that true for them as well? And in many cases it is. In the main cases, there are some things that we should also keep in mind that I'll cover a little bit later in the presentation as well. So I want to kind of share some of my favorite quotes from investors and people with disabilities who are interested in investing. And so I've asked them about their experience of having a disability and being an investor, why it's important, and their perspective. So I want to share my top favorites. There's over a lot, but these are my favorites. It's nobody's business what's in my wallet. I should be able to pull out my money from my wallet, and then I should be able to know, did I pull out a $20 bill or a $5 bill? I shouldn't have to ask somebody for assistance about that. That's my money. And when it comes to investing, it's the same thing. I should be able to do this without assistance. Again, it's the importance of money and things that maybe we take for granted when we go to pay, when we look in our wallet, when we're thinking about these things. Another lovely quote. Our money may not look the same color to me as it does to you, but as far as I know, it still buys the same amount of bread. So financial power, that buying power, it's important to keep in mind because it should be an equal playing field. And this is an interesting kind of thing. Using the screen reader is like reading through a straw. You're getting a little bit of information at a time. And what this investor is stressing is that when he's going on the website or the app, he's not getting the 30-second kind of, I'm going to get the entire picture of this website and I'll know where the elements are. He's going line by line, which is fine until you come to something like cost basis, a table that has all kinds of information of did the price go up, did it go down, what was the average, what is the yearly performance, what is your expected return, and we have a lot of information, financial information in tables, and those are notoriously difficult to navigate with a screen reader because it goes line by line, and you need to make sure that each line is always referencing what is the title of the column, right? Because as you get into the table, if you just hear numbers, then you have to rely on remembering, okay, what does this number actually correlate to? So accessibility in the role of a researcher and what I've done to incorporate these ideas in my division. So putting this in a design context and scaling efforts. Okay, so going back to this holistic approach. So inclusion is to accessibility what customer experience, CX, is to UX. Okay, so in this context, we're thinking, we had a lovely visual in other presentations of service design, client experience, CX, UX. And so it's kind of like an onion, right? And you zoom in, you zoom out. So client experience is more of an overview of all of the channels of interactions, all of the attitudes, things like that. And then user experience can be more self-serve, can be more digital, app, task accomplishment, time on the page, things like that, usability. So in terms of inclusion and accessibility, inclusion is the holistic overview of how a person manages their finances, how they learn about finances, what barriers they face, what attitudes they have about it, and how do they manage their money. And then accessibility is really more about, can I accomplish a task, right? So it's this idea of it should be both accessible and also delightful to use. So the approach that I'm taking is, yes, we are ADA compliant, right? So we have an accessibility office that is testing our experiences. But then I want to go in and say, but was that a delightful experience, right? I can go to the DMV and I can get things done, I can accomplish what I need for my transportation, but would I want to do it? Do I look forward to it? Was it delightful for me? And money and banking, these can be things that you have to do. So just because somebody came and was able to do something because they have to, did they enjoy the experience? Did you provide them with some sort of oomph and saying, I see you as a person, you're not just a number? And as researchers, there's really a lot that we don't know about finances and disability. And it's an interesting kind of topic of discussion because even when I started out in my role, I started looking into this about 5 years ago, and I thought, oh, I'm really going to see, well, how does somebody with a disability manage money? How do they invest? And from multiple conversations I've had, it really comes down to this idea of universal design and kind of so is there really a difference in how somebody with a disability invests and manage money? And the answer is yes and no. Yes, in the terms of there are aspects that a person with a disability is more concerned with and is more front of mind for them when it comes to financial management, costs of medical care, planning ahead, legacy, any type of assistance they may have. So things like that maybe do not cross the mind of somebody who is able-bodied. But at the same time, the essence of it is the same. I want to be able to do more with my money. I want to manage my money. And when it comes to being, quote unquote, good with managing money, it's a range. And it really, it's all the same whether you have a disability or not. It really comes from external factors, you're wanting to learn, and what you want to accomplish with your money. So my goal was really to understand what makes investment experience fun, what makes it delightful, as well as accessible. And so for that, I wanted to set up a stream of feedback from people with disabilities and establish client statistics later on to say, okay, yes, here's what we're hearing from as far as what our prospects and investors with disabilities are thinking, but what about our clients? And then assess our service offer for usability and delight. So I started with building a panel of participants with disabilities. So going back about 5 years ago when I started, this was just an idea that I had and I was very passionate about it. And I said, wouldn't it be great as a researcher if as I'm testing our experiences, I also double check with somebody who might be using a screen reader or might have a cognitive disability and just get their perspective. And so, I was very lucky in my leadership study. That sounds interesting. If you can, go ahead and do it. And so I checked in with the accessibility office. Have you thought about it? Do you have anything like that? They said, we're very interested in it. And then they said, well, make sure you expand it to have, at least like 5 to 6 people of each, disability. So you have kind of like a usability saturation. So that's what I did, and I built a modest but mighty panel, and I, was doing it just by myself, just kind of sleuthing around on social media groups, talking to people, going to physical locations of local organizations and saying, here's who I am, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, I'd love to hear your perspective for compensation. Would you be interested in looking into financial services with me? And I was able to assess a couple of our experiences. It was a great success, and so I acquired a budget. And then I was able to team up with vendors and grow the panel to go beyond, our local area, which had some pros and cons to it. I do think it's very important to, if you can, to do research also in person to see how a person has set up their assistive technology, what is their environment. Because, when you bring them on site, they're going to be interacting with a kind of factory technology, and people tend to use it differently and individually. And so I had a panel. And then I was then able to identify a statistical representation of Vanguard clients with disabilities and also people who identified as caregivers. And that was a very interesting learning experience as well, because this is an area where, because of PPI, you cannot just put a survey out there and say, hey, do you have a disability? What type of disability do you have? That's not something we can ask. For various reasons, there's also an idea of, okay, even if I do get my hands on this information, how am I going to store it? Who has access to it? So we've put in a lot of guardrails in the process with compliance. I worked with them on that, so that I have, it's often a double-blind kind of inquiry, and so I don't keep track of this information, but I do know the numbers. And the way that I was able to get at this question was, our legal department said, you can ask, how do you interact with the web experiences? So I crafted questions, I could ask, do you use assistive technology to access the web? But then I also said, do you find yourself reading physical materials or web materials and then forgetting what you've just read? Or do you find that the order of letters is misplaced or something? So getting at what I'm trying to parse out, and then yes or no, and then they can say, yes, I do, no, I don't want to say. The only question I could ask directly was, do you care for somebody with a disability? Because that is a fact, and we can have that information. So from that, I was then able to go further and hire a contractor, a consultant with Down syndrome. So going back to my Mighty panel, I found that when I was working with people with disabilities, each disability kind of had a little superpower that I was able to present in different assessments that we're doing. And in the case of Down syndrome, when we were working with a change of ownership team, which is the inheritance process of Vanguard, somebody passes away, a loved one, and then you inherit some accounts or money with Vanguard, and what does that process look like? This team, it's very important that everything that is written in an empathetic term, it's very friendly, it's gentle, because it is a very, it's a stressful time in somebody's life, and being in a grieving process, you could be given information, forget immediately what you need to do and need assistance again. So when we were testing our products, and it's very copy heavy, so there's just a lot of information that you need to present. And we were testing that with people with Down syndrome. I was able to say, how does this make you feel? And they would say to me, it makes me sad because it's talking about somebody who's not here anymore. But I do feel like I'm talking to a friend. And I know that if I need more information, I can call Vanguard or do this and this action. So what we needed to come across did come across. And so I kind of took that idea and said, well, what if we assess all of our content across Vanguard? Because as researchers, we often hear things like, when I go to an investment site, you really need to have a degree in finances to understand what you're talking about, or, I feel like I'm not really knowledgeable enough. I feel stupid that I don't know. So I said, can we assess this and really break it down in layman's terms? So we hired a contractor to work with us part-time. I used various research methods with her, and we were able to test most of our user-facing content for several months. And it was really successful. I really enjoyed it. It was really great. And here's my favorite quote from our contractor when I kind of asked her about some financial plans for the future, and she said, to save it in my bank account of something big that I want so badly. And I just think it really represents what we all want. We all have a financial goal that we want to accomplish. It may not be a house for everybody. It may not be a trip for everybody. But there's something that we want to do with our money. Maybe it's just a treat yourself purchase. Maybe it's just to be able to save. Or maybe it's just to have a bank account and or even just to start investing. So I want to talk about some of the things that I've learned from the research we've done. From talking to investors with disabilities and caregivers. Okay, so first, the channels and preferences of communication. Okay, going back to the example that I gave you of Sarah, who is making day trades of $20,000 at a time. So investors with disabilities, especially those using screen readers, and making large trades, they do prefer to call the investment firm. It's funny, there was a talk, in the morning yesterday that they were saying, we still call centers are not going away. And this is one of the things that kind of reaffirms that, and the reason for that is that, so you want to make sure that the trade went through, you want to make sure you didn't make a mistake. And in Sarah's words, she said, if it's a couple $1,000s, maybe I'll do it by myself because it's kind of like a small hit that I would take if I make a mistake. But if I'm really doing a large transaction, and even if everything seems okay, I'm going to call the institution, double check to make sure that everything is, really going through, just because it's important to me to do it right and that I'm not making a mistake. We've also tested the IVR, that is your phone triage system. So, for a representative, press this button. With a question about this, press this button. It's not an easy interaction to navigate for a caller with a disability. We've had a lot of, I've interviewed people who are deaf or hard of hearing. It's a very complicated process for them. And there's just, for anybody being stuck in the loop and then going down the wrong route and then having to hang out, call again, or get rerouted, it's frustrating. And it's just an additional inconvenience for somebody with a disability. And what I loved about what was really a compelling quote from somebody who was deaf or hard of hearing is saying, now I have to put my life on hold and cater to your business. Because I have to have somebody who has ASL interpretation, and they need to be watching, what is this, what is this option? Did I hear it right? Did I see it right? Is it going too fast for me? And they said, if you're sighted, if you're an able-bodied person, you could be on the phone, you could be doing laundry, you could be cooking at a time. I cannot do that. And if it's taken me hours to get through this is hours of my day, right? So it's incredibly inconvenient. And looking at chatbots, so, it's kind of the same that we tend to hear from a lot of people. Chatbots are not always very helpful. I mean, they have their purpose. But there's an idea out there that I can easily find this information on the website. Did you tell me something I didn't already know? Did you tell me something that I couldn't just find if I really looked hard enough? So that idea of what is the value of the information that I just received? Language and simple terms. This is an example of our page that we came up with. It is titled, Helping You, a Beneficiary Through the Inheritance Process. We had a couple of pages. One was for a beneficiary, and another one was for what we call an executor. There's two roles. And so this was pretty much a blog style, so very sparse images, just here's information you need to know. And we've written all of that with the guidance of our contractor with Down syndrome to make sure that it's empathetic, it's easy to understand, and it is friendly. We also tested our flow of changing a password. So if you've forgotten your password and you need to log in, and people with cognitive disabilities, because we had people on the panel that read at 3rd graders level or at 12th graders level. And we did have some people say when they got to the part that says confirm your password, they said, but they kind of went through it, but I asked them, did you know what that word meant? Like you kind of hesitated, I saw you hesitate. And they said, I didn't really know what that was supposed to do. So we changed the language from confirm password to just enter your password again. Just to be safe, to make sure that the action is clear and we're not confusing anybody. And then I've done some research with teaching a beneficiary with disabilities about investments. This kind of goes back to some of the work I've done with our clients. We had a substantial number of clients who have a beneficiary with a disability. That could be a child, it could be a loved one, it could be a spouse. And so what were their concerns? What did they want them to know about financial decision making? And this also kind of trickles down into this idea that we make this process easy for a beneficiary with a disability, but it also can impact somebody who wants to leave money to their spouse. And maybe the spouse has now been taking on the role of financial decision making in this dynamic, and maybe they don't feel comfortable taking the reins. So how do we educate that second spouse? And what do they really need to know? What is the key information they need to know? So we've kind of used a lot of that information there as well. And so in the case of a beneficiary with a disability, we might want to do a phased approach, having simple language, real life concrete examples, and then always saying, oh, do you remember that one thing I said about short-term or long-term goal? Well, this is how this applies now that we're in the next stage in our conversation, just going back. I want to touch on some of the logistics of research. I've used some survey tools, and this is specific for your participants who may be using a screen reader. I haven't been able to find a survey tool where I can go in, and if I have an image as one of the options, then I can put in alt text in there. I can't access the code. I can't really describe it. So, if anybody has a hack for that, let me know. So that's something to keep in mind. I've done some diary studies with digital platforms, and I had participants who were deaf or hard of hearing, and there was an option to record yourself or provide video feedback. And if you are deaf or hard of hearing and you're on that platform, I found out that sometimes the way the back end of the platform works is that for the video to start recording, you have to make a noise. And it can be uncomfortable and, obviously like a little awkward for somebody who's hard of hearing or deaf. So always having other inputs of feedback that they can provide, and they can opt out of that and say, no, I'll just give you maybe just audio, or I'll just have a written, response or something like that. And going back to that idea of unless somebody willingly gives you that information, you cannot ask a participant directly if they have a disability. So, when you recruit with a third party, of course, that they're going to be talking, people will be opting into your research. But if you want to ever say to yourself, well, how many of our clients, users have a disability, you really can't just ask them that. Like, you need to kind of have a way of how do you interact with a digital tool and service. And then also things to keep in mind when you run a research session. I usually factor in about 30 additional minutes if I have a participant who may be blind or visually impaired and especially if I'm bringing them on site. So they may be interacting with, yes, it's JAWS, yes, it's another screen reading software, but it's not programmed the way that they would actually use it. So we need to account for the time of, can they use it? Is everything in the right place? And then also just the logistics of giving somebody the time to, okay, I've heard what the screen reader said, let me think about this, that idea of I'm not getting the full picture right away, so giving time. In that vein, if I'm working with somebody who's deafblind and they have a refreshable Braille reader and also an ASL interpreter, they're going through multiple levels of understanding what they just read. So it's reading the content, having that refreshed in Braille, then thinking about it, my question being translated to them through ASL, and then them communicating it back. So really factoring in additional time. And we use DocuSign for consent forms and things like that. It is accessible if it's done correctly. So it's kind of like a PDF being accessible. You have to do it right, but it is accessible if it's done correctly. So looking ahead at 2024 and beyond, scaling and making impact. So really, now I'm focusing on 3 key areas. So one, I want to get more UX researchers involved in this. Our team has grown just in CX. We have like many researchers across Vanguard, but just in my division, we went from 5 years ago, 5 of us being on the team to now having 56 people. And so I'd love that in every team, each researcher felt empowered to say, I wonder how would somebody with such and such disability do this, and kind of bring them into the process. Really looking into the needs of our clients and pain points that they currently have. Do they see their needs reflected? So thinking about how do I plan for a beneficiary with special needs? What do I need to know? Now we have ABLE accounts. Yes, we have special needs trust. What are pros and cons of those? What about things that if you are receiving any kind of benefit, what do I need to keep in mind? And also looking into exploring, the hot new emerging technology with AI. How can we kind of, incorporate that in aiding the financial inclusion for investors? So here I'm thinking of examples like, when I built the board game, and math can be really difficult for somebody with a cognitive disability, and anybody really. So wouldn't it be great if you could just type in, if I have this much money now and I want to buy this thing for X amount of money, how much will I have left? It might sound simple to you, but having that sped out to somebody can really reinforce, can encourage them, can give them security, and give them financial planning. And so things I want to think about when we think about financial inclusion. Social security benefits, there's SSI and SSDI, social security insurance and disability insurance. there are some limitations there. So one you get if you're employed and you have a disability, one you get if you cannot be employed. And so the main thing to keep in mind here is that there's limits to how much money you can have to your name. And so that means that very often somebody with a disability may not want to invest. They might be afraid to invest because, oh God, what if I exceed the amount of money that I have now earned? Now I've lost my benefits. It's incredibly important to exist with those benefits. And so thinking about that. And just rethinking what we imagine when we think of a person with disabilities investing. It should really not look different than anybody else investing. But just kind of having a multi-pronged perspective of what we have and imagery available. And yeah, people with disabilities, they invest at the same rate as those without disabilities. It's the same, it's the same idea that we explore at Vanguard when we think about how people invest, what they think about. So, generational wealth, risk tolerance, wanting to invest, fear of it, markets volatility. It's kind of the same. So, there's a couple of extra things to keep in mind, but the rate of investment is going to be relatively the same. And so financial inclusion should offer a perspective of medical care, resources for loved ones with disabilities. So with medical care, we often present that information of somebody who's planning to retire, and when you approach that age, it becomes more top of mind for you. What is my medical care going to look like? And so we have a lot of information about that. And so my hope for the future is that we also include that of, if you have a disability, here's what you need to think of just throughout your lifespan and what that looks like, and include that in financial freedom roadmaps. So thank you so much. I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. I'd love to answer them, get some comments, feedback.